The crack of a gunshot sent dust spiraling from the adobe wall just inches from Abigail Harmon's head. She ducked instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pressed herself against the wall of the saloon. It was May 1876, and Las Animas, Colorado, was supposed to have been her salvation, not her execution ground. The second bullet splintered wood above her, sending fragments raining down on her long brown hair that would have to go if she wanted to survive the night. "That's for your pa's debts, girl," the gruff voice of Silas Thornton echoed from across the street. "Either you pay up or you marry me. Ain't got no other choices." Abigail's fingers trembled as they found the locket at her throat, the last memento of her mother. 3 weeks ago, her father had died in a mining accident, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of debt and a daughter with no prospects in a town that offered women 2 choices: marriage or the brothel. The sound of Thornton's boot heels grew closer on the wooden boardwalk. Abigail took a steadying breath and slipped away into the gathering darkness, her mind racing. By midnight, Abigail Harmon would no longer exist. In the cramped back room of the livery stable, Abigail's hands shook as she lifted the shears to her hair. Long brown locks fell to the hay-strewn floor as she chopped away at her defining feminine feature. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her old identity disappear with each snip. When she finished, her hair was as short as any man's, ragged and uneven but serviceable. She bound her chest tightly with strips of cloth torn from her petticoat until her breasts were flattened painfully against her ribs. From a bundle of clothes she'd stolen off a washing line, she pulled out men's trousers, a loose shirt, and a weathered vest. The boots she'd taken from her father's trunk were too large, but stuffed with rags. They would do. Abigail studied her reflection in a shard of broken mirror. The transformation was startling. Her delicate features might still betray her, but in the dim light of evening, with a hat pulled low over her eyes, she might just pass for a young man. She practiced lowering her voice, making it rougher, the way she'd heard the cowboys speak. "Name's Adam," she practiced, trying to keep her voice steady and low. "Adam Harper." By dawn, she was riding her father's old mare out of Las Animas, heading west with nothing but a small bundle of possessions, her father's revolver, and a desperate plan to find work as a man until she could save enough to start over somewhere far away. For 3 weeks, Abigail, now Adam, drifted from ranch to ranch, taking odd jobs when she could find them. She learned quickly how to move like a man, talk like a man, spit and curse like a man. She kept to herself, spoke little, and avoided situations where her deception might be discovered. The binding across her chest was a constant reminder of her precarious situation: too tight, and she couldn't breathe properly. Too loose, and her secret would be revealed. The Lucky Strike Ranch, 20 miles outside of Pueblo, was hiring hands for the spring cattle drive. The pay was good, better than anything Adam had found so far. The ranch foreman, a hard-eyed man named Barker, looked her up and down skeptically. "You ever worked cattle before, boy?" "Yes, sir," she lied, keeping her voice low. "My pa ran a small spread up near Denver before he passed." Barker snorted. "You look like you ain't old enough to shave, but we're short-handed. You can ride, since I could walk." "Fine. $1 a day plus meals. You sleep in the bunkhouse with the others. Any trouble and you're out. We head north in 3 days." The bunkhouse was her first real challenge. 10 men in close quarters, with no privacy and nowhere to hide. Abigail took the bunk in the corner, keeping her back to the wall. She learned quickly to change under blankets in the dark, to bathe in streams away from the others when possible, to wake before dawn to adjust her bindings in private. The work was backbreaking. Her soft hands blistered and bled before calluses formed. Her muscles screamed in protest at each day's labor. But she worked twice as hard as any man there, determined to prove herself useful enough that no one would look too closely at the boy who never quite fit in. On her fourth day at the Lucky Strike, she met Grant Dawson. He rode in on a magnificent black stallion, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. The ranch hands stopped their work to watch his approach, and whispers spread through the men around her. "The boss is back." Abigail glanced up from the saddle. She was mending to see the newcomer dismount in one fluid motion. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to command. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp and intelligent, the color of steel under the brim of his Stetson. "Who's that?" she asked, the older hand working beside her, trying to keep her voice casual. "That there's Grant Dawson, owner of the Lucky Strike. Been gone to Denver on business. Mean as a rattler when crossed, fair as a judge when not. Best keep your head down and do your job, kid." Grant Dawson surveyed his property, noting the new faces among his crew. His gaze lingered on Abigail for a moment longer than the others, making her heart skip uncomfortably. She ducked her head, focusing intently on her work, praying he would pass by without speaking to her. Her prayers went unanswered. "You, new boy." His voice was deep, with a quiet authority that needed no volume to command attention. "What's your name?" "Adam Harper, sir." She kept her eyes down, her voice as low and gruff as she could manage. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you, Harper." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his. A flicker of something curiosity perhaps crossed his face before his expression settled back into impassive assessment. "You ever been on a cattle drive before?" "No, sir." "Honest, at least." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're small for this work." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered, then hastily added, "Sir, we'll see." He turned to his foreman. "Barker, put Harper with the remuda." "We need someone with a light touch for the horses." Barker frowned. "We're short-handed as it is, boss. The kid ain't proven yet." "That wasn't a suggestion," Dawson said mildly, but with a steel undertone that made the foreman nod quickly. "Yes, sir. Harper, you heard the boss. You're with the horses now." As Dawson walked away, Abigail let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Working with the horses would be easier than wrestling cattle, and it would keep her somewhat apart from the other men. But the way Dawson had looked at her, as if he could see right through her disguise, left her with a cold knot of fear in her stomach. The days before the drive were a blur of preparation. Abigail found she had a natural affinity for horses. The animals responded to her gentle touch and quiet voice. She learned quickly which mount suited each cowboy, how to calm the nervous ones, how to spot the signs of lameness or discomfort before they became serious problems. Dawson watched her often, she noticed. Sometimes openly, standing at the corral fence as she worked with a particularly difficult horse. Other times she would glance up to find his gaze on her from across the ranch yard, thoughtful and measuring. The night before the drive was to begin, the men gathered around a large bonfire, passing bottles and sharing stories. Abigail sat at the edge of the circle, nursing a tin cup of coffee, declining the whiskey when it was offered. Several of the hands had already given her grief for not drinking, calling her preacher boy and little lady, though the latter was meant as mockery of her slighter build rather than any suspicion of her true nature. "Not a drinking man, Harper." Dawson's voice came from behind her, making her start. "No, sir. Never acquired the taste." He settled beside her on the log, his larger frame dwarfing hers. "Smart. Most of these fools will be riding tomorrow with pounding heads and churning stomachs." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the flames dance. "Where are you really from, Harper?" The question caught her off guard. "I told Barker, you told Barker what he wanted to hear." Dawson's voice remained conversational. "I've met every rancher within 100 miles of Denver." "None named Harper." Abigail's mouth went dry. "My pa's spread was small, we kept to ourselves." Dawson didn't sound convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he said, "You've got a good way with the horses, natural touch." "Thank you, sir. Grant." "When it's just us talking, call me Grant." She nodded, uncomfortable with the familiarity. "Yes, see Grant. How old are you, Adam, truthfully?" 21, she lied, though in fact she had turned 20 just 2 months prior. He studied her face in the firelight. "You don't look it." "I get that a lot," she said wryly, finding some confidence in the half-truth. "Blessed with a baby face, my pa used to say." Grant laughed, a warm sound that transformed his stern features. "Well, a baby face won't help you much on the trail. It's hard country between here and Cheyenne. You keep your wits about you and do as you're told, and you might just make it." "I'm tougher than I look," she said again, and this time he didn't contradict her. "I believe you are." He stood, resting a hand briefly on her shoulder, a touch that sent an unexpected warmth through her body. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll test exactly how tough." The cattle drive began at first light. 500 head of longhorns moving north through Colorado territory toward Wyoming with 15 men to guide them. The dust rose in choking clouds, the noise was deafening, and the work never ceased. Abigail rode with the remuda, managing the string of extra horses, bringing fresh mounts to tired cowboys throughout the day. It was exhausting work, but it gave her more freedom than the men who rode drag at the back of the herd, eating dust from sunup to sundown. By the 4th day, she had settled into a rhythm. Wake before the others, adjust her bindings in the privacy of pre-dawn darkness, brew coffee for the cook, tend to her own needs away from camp, then saddle the day's horses before the rest of the camp stirred. The precautions were second nature now, though the constant vigilance wore on her. It was on the 6th day that disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd, sending cattle scattering in all directions. Cowboys raced to contain the stampede, and Abigail found herself pressed into service beyond her usual duties. She rode hard, helping to turn the leaders of the stampede, when her horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down. The fall threw her clear, but as she hit the ground, pain exploded in her side. She lay stunned, the breath knocked from her lungs as chaos erupted around her. Strong hands lifted her, and through a haze of pain she saw Grant Dawson's face, tight with concern. "Harper, can you hear me?" "Where are you hurt?" She tried to speak, but could only gasp for breath. Dawson pulled her up onto his horse, holding her firmly against his chest as he rode away from the stampede toward the relative safety of a stand of trees. "Hold on, boy," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you." The jostling of the horse sent waves of agony through her side, and Abigail bit her lip to keep from crying out. When they reached the trees, Dawson dismounted and carefully lifted her down, laying her on a patch of soft grass. "Let me see," he said, reaching for the buttons of her vest. Panic shot through her, overriding even the pain. "No," she grabbed his wrist, surprisingly strong in her desperation. "I'm fine, just winded." "You're not fine. You might have broken ribs. I need to check." "Please," she begged, her voice rising in pitch before she could control it. "I'm all right, really." Dawson frowned, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. Then understanding dawned, followed by disbelief. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed. "You're a woman." Terror seized her. Her secret discovered, her life now in the hands of this man she barely knew. She tried to sit up to run, but the pain in her side forced her back down with a cry. "Easy," Dawson said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not going to hurt you." But I need to know if you're badly injured, and I can't tell that without looking." Tears of pain and fear welled in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "don't tell the others." Something in her desperate plea seemed to reach him. He nodded slowly. "All right. But I need to know if your ribs are broken." "I'll be respectful." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. With careful movements, he unbuttoned her vest and lifted her shirt just enough to expose her side, where an angry purple bruise was already forming. His fingers probed gently, causing her to wince. "Bruised, not broken, I think," he said, pulling her shirt back down. "But those bindings, they're too tight. If you've hurt your ribs, that pressure could cause real damage." She closed her eyes in resignation, knowing he was right but terrified of the vulnerability that would come with loosening her disguise. "The men won't be back for a while," Dawson said quietly. "They'll be rounding up strays until dark. We have time to figure this out." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you help me?" He sat back on his heels, considering her question seriously. "I don't rightly know," he admitted finally, "but I do know that any woman desperate enough to disguise herself as a man and join a cattle drive has a story I'd like to hear." "You'll fire me." "Probably should," he agreed, "but not yet, not until I know why." He paused. "What's your real name?" She hesitated, then surrendered to the inevitable. Abigail Harmon." "Well, Abigail Harmon," he said, a hint of his earlier smile returning. "You might be the most interesting hire I've ever made. Now, let's get those bindings loosened before you do yourself permanent harm." With as much dignity as she could muster, Abigail turned away and, with his help, loosened the cloth that had been both her protection and her prison. The relief was immediate, though the pain in her ribs remained. Dawson respectfully averted his eyes throughout, earning a fragile trust she hadn't expected to give. As dusk fell, he built a small fire and shared his canteen and jerky with her. Slowly, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as he listened without judgment, Abigail told him her story: her father's death, Thornton's threats, her desperate flight, and her need to support herself in a world that offered few options to a woman alone. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy person I've ever met," Dawson said when she finished. "Maybe both. I didn't have a choice." "There are always choices, Abigail, just not always good ones." He stoked the fire thoughtfully. "What's your plan?" "You can't keep up this disguise forever." "I just need enough money to get to California," she said. "I have a distant aunt in San Francisco. She might take me in until I can find respectable work." Dawson nodded slowly. "All right, here's what we're going to do. As far as the men know, Adam Harper took a bad fall, and I'm keeping an eye on him tonight. Tomorrow, you'll ride in the chuck wagon. I'll tell Cookie you're too bruised to sit a horse. We'll get to Cheyenne in about 2 weeks. You'll get your pay, plus a little extra for your trouble, and you can take the train west from there." Hope and suspicion warred within her. "Why would you do that for me?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. "My sister," he said finally, "tried to make her way alone after her husband died in the war. No one would hire a woman for decent work. She ended up—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "She died 3 years ago. Consumption, they said, but really it was a broken spirit." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "So am I." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I can't change what happened to her, but maybe I can help you avoid a similar fate." In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection formed in shared understanding and unexpected compassion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "Keeping your secret won't be easy, and if the men find out—" "I know. The consequences didn't bear thinking about." "Get some sleep," he said, rising to his feet. "I'll keep watch." As she drifted off, exhaustion and pain finally claiming her, Abigail's last conscious thought was that for the first time in weeks, she felt almost safe. The next morning, Abigail rode in the chuck wagon as planned, her ribs tightly wrapped but her bindings looser than before. The cook, a grizzled old man everyone called Cookie, asked no questions beyond Dawson's explanation of a bad fall, though his rheumy eyes studied her with mild curiosity. "Never seen the boss fuss over a hand before," he commented as they bounced along in the wagon. "Must see something special in you, boy." Abigail kept her eyes on the horizon, unsure how to respond. She had spent much of the night wondering about Grant Dawson's motivations, torn between gratitude for his help and fear that his assistance might come with expectations she couldn't meet. For 3 days, she traveled with the chuck wagon, helping Cookie with meal preparations while her ribs healed. Dawson checked on her regularly, always careful to keep their interactions brief and professional when others were watching. But occasionally, when they had a moment alone, he would ask how she was feeling, whether her bindings were still comfortable, if she needed anything. On the 4th day, she felt well enough to return to her duties with the remuda, though Dawson insisted she take only the gentlest horses and avoid any unnecessary strain. The men teased Adam about being coddled by the boss, but there was no real malice in it. If anything, they seemed to respect her more for having earned Dawson's attention. As the drive continued north, Abigail found herself watching Grant Dawson with new eyes. She noticed the quiet authority he carried, the respect he commanded without resorting to bullying or threats. She saw how he worked alongside his men when needed, never asking them to do what he wouldn't do himself. And she observed his moments of unexpected gentleness with a nervous horse, with an exhausted cowboy with her. For his part, Dawson seemed equally fascinated by her. He sought her out during rest periods, ostensibly to check on her recovery, but their conversations often extended beyond her health. He asked about her life before her father's death, about her dreams for the future, about her thoughts on books and ideas that most cowboys had never considered. "You're educated," he remarked one evening as they sat slightly apart from the others, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. "That's unusual for a woman out here." "My mother was a school teacher before she married," Abigail explained. "She taught me everything she knew, and my father encouraged it. He said a sharp mind was an asset, even for a daughter." He was right. Dawson's expression grew thoughtful. "My ranch manager quit last month. That's why I was in Denver looking for a replacement." She raised an eyebrow, uncertain where he was going with this revelation. "The job requires someone who can read contracts, keep ledgers, write correspondence," he continued. "Someone trustworthy with good judgment and a head for figures. Are you?" She hesitated, scarcely daring to hope. "Are you offering me a position? Would you consider it? The pay is good, better than cowboying. You'd have your own quarters in the main house. No more pretending to be a man." The offer was tempting more than tempting, but suspicion flared again. "Why would you trust me with such responsibility?" "You barely know me." "I'm a good judge of character," he said simply. "And I've watched you these past weeks. You work harder than any 2 men, you're smart, you're careful, and you've got more grit than anyone I've ever met." He paused. "Think about it. You don't have to decide now." That night, Abigail lay awake long after the camp had quieted, weighing Dawson's unexpected offer against her original plan. Working as his ranch manager would provide security and respectable employment, everything she'd been searching for. But it would also mean remaining near the men who knew her as Adam, with the constant risk of her deception being discovered. And then there was Grant himself. She couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when he was near, the way his smile warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. Such feelings were dangerous. He was her employer, and even if he seemed to respect her now, men's respect for women was often conditional at best. Still, the thought of saying goodbye to him in Cheyenne left her with an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. 3 days later, disaster struck again. This time it came not from nature but from men. The drive had stopped for the night near a small creek. The cattle settled in a wide meadow when riders appeared on the ridge above their camp. 7 of them, hard-faced and heavily armed. "Rustlers," Barker muttered, reaching for his rifle. "Boss, they've got us outnumbered." Dawson stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Evening, gentlemen," he called up to the mounted men. "Something we can help you with," the leader, a scar-faced man with a shock of red hair, grinned unpleasantly. "Matter of fact there is. We'll be taking your herd off your hands, save you the trouble of that long drive to Cheyenne." "I'm afraid I can't allow that," Dawson replied evenly. "These cattle represent a year's work for my ranch. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt trying to steal them." The rustler's grin widened. "Only ones getting hurt will be you and your boys if you don't step aside." Abigail's heart raced as she stood with the other hands, trying to look tough while fear coursed through her veins. She had her father's revolver tucked into her belt, but she'd never fired it at a person. The thought of doing so made her stomach churn. "Last chance," the rustler warned, his men spreading out along the ridge. "Walk away with your lives or don't walk away at all." Instead of answering, Dawson gave a subtle nod. Instantly, his men dove for cover as the first shots rang out from the rustlers. Abigail found herself behind an overturned wagon beside Grant, who was calmly checking his revolver. "Stay down," he ordered her. "If this goes badly, you run for the trees and keep going." "I'm not leaving," she insisted, drawing her own weapon with a hand that trembled only slightly. "I can shoot." A bullet splintered the wood near her head, making her duck lower. Grant's expression hardened as he returned fire, dropping one of the rustlers from his saddle. "Damn it, Abigail, this isn't the time for heroics." "I'm one of your crew," she shot back. "I won't run while the rest of you fight." For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, his angry and concerned, hers determined. Then the moment broke as more gunfire erupted around them. The firefight seemed to last forever, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. 2 of Dawson's men were wounded, but the rustlers fared worse. 3 lay dead or dying on the ridge, and another clutched a bleeding arm as they retreated into the gathering darkness, their attempt at easy profit thwarted. As the sounds of hoofbeats faded, Abigail let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed, the revolver suddenly heavy and foreign in her grip. "You all right?" Grant's voice was rough with concern as he gently took the weapon from her unresisting fingers. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of what had just happened, that men had died, that she might have died, crashed over her in a wave that left her light-headed. "I need to check on the wounded," Grant said, his hand lingering on hers for a moment. "Stay here. We'll double the watch tonight." The attack changed things. The easy camaraderie of the drive was replaced by watchful tension as they pushed the herd harder, eager to reach Cheyenne and safety. Abigail found herself constantly scanning the horizon, jumping at unexpected sounds, sleeping fitfully when she slept at all. Grant, too, was different, more distant, preoccupied with ensuring his men and cattle reached their destination without further incident. Their quiet conversation ceased as he spent evenings planning routes and organizing extra guards. It was 2 days after the attack, as Abigail was checking the remuda horses at dusk, that she felt someone watching her. She turned to find Barker, the foreman, leaning against the corral fence, his expression unreadable. "Evening, Barker," she said, keeping her voice low and even, though something in his gaze made her uneasy. "Took a bath in the creek today," he said conversationally. "Interesting thing happened. Thought I saw someone else there too. Someone who didn't look much like a cowboy when the shirt came off." His eyes narrowed. "Someone who looked a hell of a lot like a woman." Ice flooded Abigail's veins. She tightened her grip on the lead rope in her hands, calculating the distance to her horse, wondering if she could outrun him if necessary. "Don't know what you're talking about," she managed, though her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Barker smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "I think you do, Miss Harper, or whatever your real name is." He stepped closer. "Now I'm trying to decide what to do with this interesting information. The boys wouldn't take kindly to finding out they've been riding with a woman in disguise. Might feel betrayed. Might want to teach you a lesson. Or you could keep it to yourself." Grant's voice cut through the gathering darkness like a knife. He stepped from the shadow of a nearby tree, his expression thunderous. "And keep all your teeth in the process." Barker's hand twitched toward his gun, but Dawson was faster, his revolver already drawn and pointed casually at the foreman's chest. "Now, boss," Barker said, raising his hands placatingly, "you can't blame a man for being surprised. Finding out we've had a woman masquerading as a hand all this time. It ain't right." "What isn't right," Grant replied, his voice dangerously soft, "is threatening a person who's done nothing but honest work since joining this outfit. She lied to all of us. She had her reasons." Grant's grip on his revolver remained steady. "And those reasons are none of your concern. The men have a right to know," Barker insisted. "The men have a right to be treated fairly by their foreman, which means you don't go stirring up trouble where none exists." Grant took a step closer. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget what you think you saw. You're going to finish this drive like the professional I hired you to be, and when we reach Cheyenne, you'll get your pay and go your own way." "You're firing me over her." Barker's incredulity was tinged with anger. "After 5 years. I'm firing you because you just threatened someone under my protection," Grant corrected him. "The fact that you can't see why that's wrong tells me everything I need to know about your character." The tension stretched between them, brittle as ice on a spring creek. Finally, Barker spat on the ground near Abigail's feet. "Fine. Have it your way, but this ain't over." He stalked away, his rigid back radiating fury. When he was gone, Abigail's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Grant holstered his weapon and moved to her side, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Are you all right?" She nodded shakily. "Thank you. If you hadn't come when you did, I've been keeping an eye on you since the attack," he admitted. "I was worried the rustlers might come back, but it seems the danger was closer than I thought." He sighed heavily. "We need to get you out of here. Barker won't keep quiet for long. But Cheyenne is still days away." "There's a town about 15 miles east," Grant said. "Ridgefield. Small, but it has a stage stop. You could be on your way to California by tomorrow." The prospect of leaving so suddenly, of never seeing the drive completed, never seeing Grant again, left her feeling hollow. But she recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. Her disguise was compromised. It was only a matter of time before the rest of the men discovered the truth. "What about my pay?" she asked, practical concerns asserting themselves despite the turmoil of her emotions. Grant reached into his vest and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this for you. Your wages, plus the bonus I promised." The weight of the coins in her palm felt simultaneously like success and failure. She had achieved what she set out to do, earned enough money to escape west, but at the cost of connections she hadn't expected to form, feelings she hadn't intended to develop. "Thank you," she said formally, trying to mask the confusion in her heart. "For everything." Grant's expression was inscrutable in the deepening dusk. "Pack your things. I'll ride with you to Ridgefield tonight." They traveled in silence under a blanket of stars, the prairie stretching endlessly around them. Abigail found herself memorizing the moment, the rhythm of her horse beneath her, the soft night sounds of insects and distant coyotes, the solid presence of the man riding beside her. In another life, another time, things might have been different. Ridgefield appeared as a cluster of lights on the horizon just after midnight. The small town was mostly dark, with only the saloon and the hotel showing signs of life at this hour. Grant led her to the hotel, securing her a room for what remained of the night and inquiring about the stage schedule for the morning. "There's a stage at noon," he told her as they stood awkwardly in the hotel lobby. "It'll take you to Julesburg, where you can catch the Union Pacific West." "Thank you," she said again, the words feeling increasingly inadequate. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Live well," he said simply. "That's repayment enough." He hesitated, then added, "My offer still stands, you know, the ranch manager position." Hope flickered briefly in her chest, but reality quickly extinguished it. "We both know that's impossible now. Barker would make sure everyone knew my secret." "I could fire all of them," he suggested with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And hire an entire new crew who wouldn't question why your ranch manager wears dresses." She shook her head sadly. "It was a lovely dream, but we both know it can't work." The silence between them grew heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Grant reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Abigail Harmon," he said softly, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. I wish—" He trailed off, then shook his head slightly. "I wish you safe travels." He released her hand and stepped back, tipping his hat in a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and regret. Then he turned and walked out of the hotel, leaving Abigail standing alone in the quiet lobby, a hollow ache in her chest where something precious might have grown if given the chance. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay on the unfamiliar hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events that had led her to this point and wondering about the paths not taken. By morning, she had made her decision. She rose early, changed into the single dress she had kept hidden in her bundle, faded and wrinkled, but undeniably feminine, and went to inquire about the stage schedule again. Then she wrote a brief note and paid a boy to deliver it to the Lucky Strike cattle camp. At precisely noon, Abigail stood on the boardwalk outside the stage office, her small bag at her feet, watching as the westbound stage was made ready for departure. The driver was checking harnesses while passengers began to board. In a few minutes, she would step onto that stage and leave behind the strange, challenging, unexpectedly meaningful chapter of her life as Adam Harper. Abigail. She turned at the sound of her name, her real name spoken in that now familiar voice. Grant Dawson stood a few yards away, his horse tied to a hitching post behind him, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty that mirrored her own feelings. "You came," she said, a smile breaking across her face despite her best efforts at composure. "Your note wasn't very specific," he replied, moving closer. "I've reconsidered your offer. If it still stands, meet me at the stage office at noon." He raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't entirely sure what offer you were referring to." "The one where I don't get on this stage," she said softly. His eyes never left hers as he closed the distance between them. "And what about Barker, the complications?" "I've been thinking about that. What if—" She took a deep breath. "What if it wasn't your ranch manager who wore dresses but your wife?" Grant's step faltered. For a moment he stood perfectly still, and Abigail's courage nearly deserted her. Then slowly, deliberately, he removed his hat, a smile spreading across his features that transformed his entire face. "Are you proposing to me, Abigail Harmon?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I'm suggesting a solution to our problem," she managed, though her voice wasn't as steady as she'd hoped. "A business arrangement of sorts." "A business arrangement," he repeated, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Grant, I'm being serious." "So am I." He took her hands in his. "I've known you as Adam Harper, the most dedicated, hard-working hand I've ever hired. I've known you as Abigail Harmon, a woman of extraordinary courage and intelligence. I'd very much like the chance to know you as Abigail Dawson, if you'll do me the honor." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unexpected. "That's not exactly a proper proposal, you know." "Well then." To her astonishment, he knelt before her right there on the boardwalk, still holding her hands in his. Behind them, the stage driver called the final boarding, but neither of them turned. "Abigail Harmon, from the moment I discovered who you really are, I haven't been able to think of much else. Your courage, your determination, your heart, they've captured mine completely. I know this is sudden and perhaps foolish, but I've learned that life offers few chances at true happiness. I don't want to miss this one." His eyes, earnest and vulnerable, held hers. "Will you marry me? Not as a business arrangement, but as my partner, my equal, my love." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He rose to his feet and, heedless of the small crowd that had gathered to watch this unexpected scene, pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was sweet and tentative, a promise of deeper connections to come. When they parted, both were smiling like fools. "What about the cattle drive?" Abigail asked suddenly. "Your herd Barker can handle it," Grant said dismissively. "I sent word this morning that he's not fired after all if he gets the herd to Cheyenne without further incident. He keeps his job. After seeing his face when I rode out, I suspect he'll deliver every last cow just to prove he can." "And the ranch manager position, still open," he assured her. "Though the job description might need some adjustments. More authority for one thing. Equal partnership in all ranch decisions." "That sounds agreeable," she said, her smile widening. "When do we start?" "Right now, if you like." He glanced at the stage, which was preparing to depart without her. "Unless you've changed your mind about California." Abigail looked at the westbound stage, then back at Grant, at the future she'd never dared to imagine but now stretched before her, full of possibility. "California can wait," she decided. "I think I've found where I belong." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Ridgefield, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Abigail wore her one dress, freshly washed and pressed by the hotel maid, and Grant wore his best shirt, his dark hair slicked back with water in a futile attempt at formality. It wasn't the wedding either of them might have imagined in their younger years, but as they spoke their vows in the simple wooden chapel, both knew they wouldn't have changed a thing. The journey back to the Lucky Strike took 3 days, during which they stopped at a general store in a larger town to purchase appropriate clothing for the new Mrs. Dawson. It felt strange, after weeks in men's attire, to feel skirts swishing around her ankles again, to have her hair still short but growing arranged more femininely beneath a bonnet. "You look beautiful," Grant told her sincerely as she emerged from the store in her new blue dress. "But then, you looked beautiful in those ridiculous oversized trousers too." She swatted his arm playfully. "Careful, Mr. Dawson. Those ridiculous trousers helped save your cattle drive and found me a wife," he agreed, pulling her close for a quick kiss. "Best hiring decision I ever made." The Lucky Strike ranch house was larger than Abigail had expected, a sprawling 2-story structure built of solid timber, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and large windows that caught the afternoon light. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking lush pastureland, with the Rocky Mountains forming a dramatic backdrop to the west. "It's beautiful," she breathed as they approached. "How long has it been in your family?" "Built it myself, 6 years ago," Grant said with quiet pride. "Started with nothing but a land claim and a handful of cattle. Took a lot of work to get to this point. You've accomplished something remarkable." "We're just getting started," he promised, helping her down from her horse. "Together, we'll build something even greater." The ranch hands still on the property, those who hadn't gone on the drive, greeted their boss's return with surprise that quickly shifted to astonishment when he introduced his new bride. Speculation ran rampant. Abigail could tell, but Grant's matter-of-fact manner and obvious happiness seemed to quell the worst of the gossip. Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper who managed the main house, took one look at Abigail's short hair and practical demeanor and declared her a sensible choice, unlike those flibbertigibbet girls from town who have been setting their caps at the boss for years. Within days, Abigail had won the older woman's approval completely by demonstrating her knowledge of household management and her willingness to learn the specific workings of the Lucky Strike. The cattle drive returned 3 weeks after their wedding. True to Grant's prediction, Barker delivered the herd to Cheyenne without further incident, returning with a healthy profit and a grudging respect for his employer's unconventional decisions. If he recognized the new Mrs. Dawson as the former Adam Harper, he gave no indication, treating her with the distant courtesy due the boss's wife. The other hands who had known her as Adam were less restrained in their shock, though most found the revelation more amusing than offensive once the initial surprise wore off. "Should have known something wasn't right," Cookie declared at the welcome home dinner. "No real cowboy turns down whiskey that many times, or bathes that regular," another hand added, sending a ripple of laughter through the bunkhouse. Grant squeezed her hand under the table as the men shared their moments of suspicion or retrospective clarity. What might have been humiliating was transformed, through his unwavering support and the men's good-natured acceptance, into something closer to a shared joke, the time they were all fooled by the boss's future wife. Later that night, as they lay in the large bed they now shared, Abigail nestled against Grant's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully, "though I still worry sometimes." "About what?" "That one day you'll wake up and regret marrying a woman who tricked her way onto your cattle drive, that you'll wish for someone more conventional." Grant chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest beneath her ear. "Abigail, I spent years surrounded by conventional women. They bored me to tears. What would I possibly want with convention when I could have you brave, brilliant, completely unprecedented you?" She smiled against his skin. "When you put it that way. Besides," he added, his voice growing serious, "you didn't trick your way onto my drive. You earned your place through hard work and determination, the same way you'll earn respect as my wife and business partner." "Partner," she repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that. Good." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because I've been thinking about expansion. With the profits from this drive, we could buy that tract of land to the north, increase our herd size by at least a third." Abigail propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly fully engaged in the conversation. "The Whitman property, but the water rights have been contested for years." "Which is why the price is lower than it should be," Grant pointed out. "If we could resolve those issues, we'd need to negotiate with the Petersons," she mused, her mind already racing ahead. "Their claim is tenuous at best, but they're proud. They won't want to appear weak. Grant grinned up at her. "See, this is why I married you. That brain of yours is as attractive as the rest of you." She laughed and settled back against him. "So your proposal wasn't just a business arrangement after all." "Definitely not," he assured her, his arms tightening around her. "Though the business benefits are considerable." In the years that followed, the Lucky Strike flourished under their joint management. Abigail's sharp mind for figures and contracts complemented Grant's practical knowledge of cattle and land, creating a partnership that became the envy of ranchers across 3 territories. They expanded thoughtfully, invested wisely, and built a reputation for fair dealing that served them well through both prosperous years and lean ones. 2 years after their wedding, Abigail gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after her father. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Grant's sister. Both children grew up strong and confident, raised by parents who valued intelligence and integrity above conventional gender roles. Elizabeth, to the amusement of many, showed a natural affinity for horses from an early age, while James displayed a thoughtful, bookish nature that reminded Abigail of her own childhood. Both were encouraged to develop their talents without restriction, to find their own paths in a world that was slowly, fitfully changing. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Grant surprised Abigail with a gift that brought tears to her eyes: a formal document naming her co-owner of the Lucky Strike Ranch, legally recognizing what had been true in practice for a decade. "You didn't need to do this," she protested, though her fingers traced the embossed lettering with obvious pleasure. "I know we're partners." "I wanted it official," he said. "For the children, for the future. No one will ever be able to question your place here." She smiled up at the man who had discovered her secret all those years ago and chosen to protect rather than expose it, the man who had seen her true self when she was hiding from the world. "No one would dare," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Not anymore." And she was right. The young woman who had once cut her hair and bound her chest to survive had become a respected rancher's wife, a shrewd businesswoman, a beloved mother, and through it all, she had remained entirely, authentically herself. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Abigail would stand on the porch of their home, looking out over the land that was now truly hers, and marvel at the journey that had brought her here. From desperate flight to lasting love, from deception to honest partnership, a path as unlikely and winding as the cattle trails that crisscrossed the Western Territories. Grant would often join her in these moments of reflection, his arm slipping around her waist, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been since that first night he discovered her secret and chose to keep it. "Any regrets?" he would sometimes ask, though he knew the answer. And Abigail would shake her head and lean into his embrace, remembering the frightened young woman who had once pretended to be someone else in order to survive, and the remarkable man who had helped her become more fully herself than she had ever dreamed possible. "Not a single one," she would answer truthfully. "Not a single one."